Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Hart HFSD01 4-volt screwdriver. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the charging port. The charging port is located at the rear of the tool on the top, and it is a barrel style charging port, and well, quite frankly, it's adequate. There's a little bit of wiggling, and there's probably a little bit more wiggling than I personally would like to see from a charging port, and it's a barrel style charging port, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it is functional and it will get the job done. I personally would have liked to have seen a USB style C charging port, but it is what it is. Let's move on. And next up we have the LED charging indicator light. The LED indicator light is located on the bottom of the tool underneath the charging port and just a little bit forward of the lanyard loop, and it is a small red LED light that will turn on when you plug in the charging cable. Overall, it doesn't really serve any function other than to let you know that it's charging, and that's about all I can say about it. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the grip. The grip consists of a nice rubberized texture on top of a plastic body, and overall it feels, well, it feels okay. The rubberized texture feels high quality. I don't have any issues with that, but the overall mold of the grip just doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't feel like it, well, is designed to be held the way I think the designers intended it to be held. Quite frankly, it feels more comfortable to hold it in reverse, and that's usually how I end up holding the tool when I'm operating it. So at the end of the day, there really is nothing glaringly wrong with the grip, but at the same time, I think it could still be better. Okay, let's talk about the trigger. Now, the trigger on this particular tool is located on the underside of the tool, and it's a long black piece of hard plastic, which is fairly slippery. I would have liked to have seen some sort of a rubberized texture on top of this since it's sort of incorporated in with the grip, but we didn't get that, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really give you all that much control over the tool. It does its job. There's a little bit of a delay from when you pull on the trigger from where the motor starts, or when the motor starts, and so I think that's another aspect that could have been improved. I personally would not have went with a paddle style trigger with this particular tool. I personally would have liked to have seen some sort of a lever up near your thumb that you could basically push it in one direction and it would go that direction, or in the other direction and it would go in that direction, and have a little bit of a variable speed aspect to it, because the trigger that is included, well, it's a single speed and it's not all that fast, and it's not all that slow either. So quite frankly, it doesn't really leave me happy in either regard. So at the end of the day, I think this is an area of the tool that could use some improvement, but it still gets the job done, so it squeaks by just barely with a pass. Okay, next up we have the selector switch for your forward, reverse, and safety. The switch is made out of a hard blue plastic with the indicated positions written out in abbreviation on the switch itself. The forward position is when you're drilling into a object, and the reverse position is when you're extracting or in reverse. Overall, the switch's location is, well, not ideal. I personally would have had it moved up probably about 1.5 inches, and I would have had it rotated 90 degrees so that it would have been a little bit easier to access side to side rather than up and down, which will require you to move your hand half the time in order for you to change your directions, which is a little bit of a pain depending on what kind of a job you are working on. Overall, this particular switch does get the job done, and other than the orientation and just the overall design of it, it still is functional, so it still gets a pass. But I personally would have liked to have seen a directional lever that was integrated with the trigger rather than the trigger and selector switch that they decided to go with. And last but not least, we have the 1/4 inch hex bit chuck, or bit holder, whatever you want to call it. This is a fairly standard design, and well, quite frankly, there really is not much to say. It's made out of metal, and it will do a good job of holding pretty much any sort of hex bit that you put into it securely, and unless you're using it with a drill bit and you've drilled into wood, it'll pretty much hold the bit no matter what. So I don't have any complaints really when it comes to the hex bit, because, well, this is just the standard design that you'll find on pretty much any electric screwdriver. So yeah, let's move on. Okay, let's talk about how much the tool weighs. The tool weighs 422 grams, which is a little bit under a pound, which means it's a fairly lightweight tool. So at the end of the day, that is something that is going for it. Okay, let's talk about the performance of this electric screwdriver. Overall, I was fairly happy with its performance when it comes to extracting screws from this broken drill. It did take a little bit longer than I personally would have liked, or, well, I would have liked to have seen it go a lot quicker, but it still did a fairly decent job of extracting them, and I didn't have any issues in that regard. Now, when it came to putting the screws back in, well, it did a good job of putting the screws back in. Well, a little bit too good of a job. There's a little bit too much power for you to safely reassemble, let's say, power tools, because I did have this snap one of the plastic posts that was in the drill, and I thought I was being fairly careful at the time. So that's just something you need to be aware of when using this electric screwdriver, that you probably should hand tighten it once you get the screw mostly in. Okay, now when it comes to using this electric screwdriver with wood objects, it's sort of lacking in that department. You'll be able to put in small screws such as your basic fastener screws or your occasional very, very short wood deck screws. But other than that, this particular screwdriver just isn't going to have enough oomph, or torque I should say, in order to put a full-size construction or deck screw into an object completely without you having to hand tighten it down. And quite frankly, I'm not sure what that will actually do to the internals of this particular tool. So at the end of the day, this is really going to be meant for your lightweight jobs where you have a pre-drilled hole, or you have pre-drilled holes and you're just putting screws in for, like, when you're assembling those lovely pieces of furniture that you get at that IKEA store or Walmart or something like that. And it's not really going to be for your do-it-yourself projects. It just doesn't have enough oomph for that. Or RPMs. It just can't get those bits up to speed to, well, drill your own holes before you try to insert a screw. So at the end of the day, I would rate this as a pre-assembly tool or a disassembly tool, and that really is about it. And quite frankly, I think there's better options on the market than this particular tool for those jobs, because the ergonomics of this particular tool just are not all that great. And not to mention, it doesn't have a clutch or an LED light, which a lot of other 4-volt screwdrivers do have. So at the end of the day, considering the price of this particular tool, it just is not all that, well, appealing in most regards. I think there really are better options on the market, and we'll go through some of those in a later segment of this particular video. But let's move on to the pros and cons. And the first pro is rubber grip. The rubberized grip on this particular tool is very comfortable and it's very well done, and overall I really do like the rubberized grip on this particular tool, even if I do not particularly like the ergonomics that go with it. Decent torque for 4 volts. Overall, this particular screwdriver, while it only has 4 volts of energy to work with, it does have fairly decent torque for that amount of voltage, so this is a pro in my opinion. Build quality. Overall, the build quality of this particular electric screwdriver is fairly nice. It doesn't feel overly plasticky, and it actually feels fairly decent, so in my opinion, this is a pro. And the first met is, well, it's slow. I've had other electric screwdrivers that have a faster RPM rating, and that makes them useful for using with drill bits, even if they aren't designed to be used with drill bits. This particular screwdriver has a fairly slow speed, and while that isn't good for drilling into wood, it is useful for reassembly of tools. But there's a big downside to this particular tool that sort of makes it bad for that as well, but we'll get into that here in a second. No USB charging. I really would have preferred to see a USB charging port rather than the barrel plug, because quite frankly, I think USB-C charging ports are superior to the old style barrel port charging systems, and easier to find, and there's going to be more of them available in random locations. Ergonomics. The ergonomics on this particular tool are not good. The paddle switch gets in the way and you accidentally press it. The selector switch is hard to change if you're needing to change your direction or put it into a neutral position. And just quite frankly, I'm just not a huge fan of the way this particular tool feels. But that is my opinion. You might have a different opinion, but for me, this is a downside. And the next con is size. Overall, the Hart screwdriver is definitely longer and thicker, and if you include your hand in the overall width of the screwdriver, because you have to hold the body of the Hart, you'll notice that you won't be able to get into as many tight spaces as you can, say, that channel lock electric screwdriver or that compact Ryobi drill. So at the end of the day, the size of the Hart is definitely a con in my opinion. And the next con is no LED light in the front. Yes, there is no illuminating LED light. There are a lot of electric compact screwdrivers that do have LED lights, and there are a lot that don't. But considering the price point and the fact it doesn't have any other really good features, I would consider the fact this is lacking an LED light to definitely be a con. And the last con is no clutch. Not having a clutch means that when you're working with a more delicate fastener or a more delicate object that you're repairing, you're really going to have to be depending more on your own skill, and if you end up slipping because of the bad ergonomics, you're going to end up damaging whatever you're working on. So not having a clutch is definitely a major con in my opinion. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular tool. Overall, this particular tool is sort of a interesting option. Quite frankly, I really think there are much better options that are only slightly more expensive on the market that can do everything this particular tool can do and more. There's currently a new tool that Hyper Tough, which is also a Walmart brand, is offering, and it only costs about $25, and it's a 12-volt compact drill, and quite frankly, I really think that's the better way of going when it comes to a handheld tool that is small and affordable. This particular tool just is not all that, well, appetizing. You don't have a clutch, there's no LED light, the batteries aren't replaceable, it doesn't have enough power for a lot of applications, it doesn't have enough speed for a lot of applications, but yet it has too much power for delicate operations, and the ergonomics are crap, so quite frankly there's a chance you're going to damage something unintentionally simply because you will have your hand slip or something. So at the end of the day, would I recommend this particular screwdriver? No, I would not recommend this particular screwdriver, nor would I recommend its clone from Ryobi either. Either one of these particular tools just is not in the running, in my opinion. And if I didn't find mine in a discount section for about $7, I probably would not have bothered to review this particular tool. But I was captivated by the price tag, and so I ended up buying it. So at the end of the day, would I recommend this tool? Yeah, no, I'd say pass on this particular tool. And that's it for this particular video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. God bless.